Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into something that is absolutely mind-blowing once you really start to see it. We're going to look at how ancient biblical accounts of leprosy aren't just primitive medical records. They are actually incredibly detailed maps of a cosmic war for reality itself.
To really get this, we kind of have to completely shatter our modern assumptions about public health and ancient dermatology. We so often read these ancient texts as if they're, old-school medical journals, but the source material reveals they are mapping out something far more profound, and honestly, the stakes are terrifying.
Here's the roadmap for our journey today. First, the constitutional blueprint. Second, judicial signs of rebellion. Third, strategic inverted theater. Fourth, the ultimate reversed contagion. And finally, from cleansing to worship.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the constitutional blueprint, specifically the legislation of Leviticus 13 and 14.
Now, every biblical narrative involving this topic is governed by this legislative foundation. And the Hebrew term here, tzara'ath, is wild. It is absolutely not modern Hansen's disease. It represents a massive crisis of cosmic geography. Think of it as an ontological fracture. It's literally the visible intrusion of death, decay, and chaos into God's ordered world, threatening to turn his portable Eden right back into a lifeless wasteland.
We have got to stop looking at this through a modern clinical lens. When someone was struck with this condition, they weren't handed a prescription as a patient. No, they were plunged into a state of living death. They became a ritually dead exile, severed completely from the life-giving center of God's presence and sacred space.
Because of this severe threat, God appoints the priest to act as what we can call an epistemic guardian. The priest isn't acting as a physician giving out therapy. He's executing a strict spatial mandate. His job is to evaluate active corruption and strictly enforce the boundary between the sacred camp and the chaotic wilderness, essentially exiling the threat into the backrooms of society.
Moving on to Section 2, judicial signs of rebellion. Let's look at some Old Testament case studies.
In the historical narratives, God actually weaponizes this ontological fracture as a visible judicial sign of covenant rebellion. Looking at Miriam, she challenged God's appointed mediator, Moses, and received a measured covenant discipline of 7 days outside the camp. Then you have Gehazi, who tried to commodify divine grace out of pure greed, and he inherited an enduring judgment while the Gentile outsider was cleansed. But the most terrifying example of this verdict from the heavenly courtroom is definitely King Uzziah.
Uzziah's tragedy perfectly reveals the devastating Dunning-Kruger effect in sacred space. He attempted to seize priestly identity by intruding into the temple to burn incense, bypassing the epistemic guardians out of pure pride. And tzara'ath broke out instantly, right on his forehead. This wasn't random, by the way. The forehead was the exact anatomical location where the true high priest wore the golden plate engraved with "Holiness to the Lord." So God brands him a counterfeit priest and exiles him to permanent living death in the wastelands.
Okay, Section 3, strategic inverted theater and the subversion of the cosmic map.
But here's the thing. God doesn't just use this affliction for judgment. He completely flips the script on the accuser. This is a concept we can call inverted theater. It's this brilliant divine taunt where God deliberately chooses the weak, the liminal agents, the ritually dead outcasts to execute his grace and just utterly humiliate the powers of darkness.
Just look at 2 Kings 7. You have these 4 starving lepers sitting at the threshold of the city gate, basically trapped in the liminal backrooms of Israel, legally disqualified from society. Yet God uses these exact outcasts to cross into the enemy camp and become the very first heralds of salvation to save a dying covenant city. It's an absolute masterpiece of divine subversion.
Now, as we look at the strict isolation of the Old Covenant, we really have to ask ourselves, how does the gap get bridged? If the corruption is so violently opposed to sacred space, how can an outcast ever be pulled back from the edge of the abyss?
Which brings us to Section 4, the ultimate reversed contagion, and the New Testament fulfillment in Matthew 8.
This entire theological architecture crashes into the New Testament narratives with breathtaking power. Under Levitical law, uncleanness is violently contagious, right? It demands quarantine. If you touch the unclean, you become unclean. But Jesus executes the ultimate reversed contagion. When he descends the mountain and touches the untouchable, the exact opposite happens. Because he is the true temple, his perfect holiness acts offensively. He doesn't contract the defilement, he actively annihilates the chaos.
But Jesus doesn't stop there. By sending the cleansed man back to the priest, Jesus forces the Aaronic priesthood to legally and liturgically certify that the Messiah has arrived. He literally makes their own Levitical system a witness to its own fulfillment.
And this maps out the exact threshold event protocol from Leviticus 14. The priest had to physically step outside the safety of the camp to meet the exile. Then there's a ritual of substitution, followed by applying blood to the right ear, thumb, and big toe. Now, I know that sounds like the world's strangest spot treatment, but it was profoundly meaningful. Because the blood answers the accuser's claim, holy oil could then be applied right over it, consecrating the outcast as a king and priest. It perfectly foreshadows Jesus, our ultimate high priest, who goes outside the gate to absorb our exiles.
Finally, Section 5, From Cleansing to Worship, the ultimate telos in Luke 17.
This brings us to an absolutely brilliant contrast. Grace cannot be seized by human entitlement, like King Uzziah tried to do. It can only be received by humble faith. In Luke 17, Jesus cleanses 10 lepers out in the borderlands. But only one of them, an unclean Samaritan foreigner, turns back and falls on his face in perfect worship.
The 9 Israelites received their physical cleansing and just left, but the Samaritan returned, proving that the true destination of this entire cosmic map is restored communion. Jesus tells the 9 they are cleansed, using the Greek word katharizo, but to the Samaritan, he says his faith has saved him, using sozo, comprehensive salvation. The profound reality here is that the ultimate telos, the goal of all this theology, the quarantine, the blood, and the oil, it was never just about healthy skin. It was always about restoring exiled humanity to worship at the feet of the King.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider where you stand on this cosmic map. Are we merely seeking to be cleansed of our uncomfortable circumstances, or are we truly ready to cross the threshold from the wilderness into comprehensive salvation in the very presence of the living God? It is an incredible journey from the blueprints of Leviticus to the grace of the New Testament. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.